The Propeller Photo Death. On October 26, 2024, Amanda Gallagher was working at a small skydiving airfield near Wichita, Kansas. Amanda was 37 years old, a photographer who regularly worked with skydivers, capturing images of jumpers as they boarded aircraft and returned from flights. It was a job she had done many times before. That afternoon, a Cessna 182, a small aircraft commonly used for parachute jumps, had just landed after dropping a group of skydivers. Like many planes used in skydiving operations, the aircraft was preparing for another quick turnaround. The pilot had landed, but the engine was still running and the propeller was still spinning as the next group of jumpers began gathering nearby. From a distance, airplane propellers can become nearly invisible when they rotate at full speed. The blades spin thousands of times per minute, creating a blur that can be almost impossible to see. Amanda continued doing what she always did, taking photos near the aircraft. Witnesses later said she had raised her camera to capture another shot of the activity around the plane. Then, while adjusting her position, she stepped backward without looking behind her, directly into the path of the spinning propeller. The impact was immediate. People nearby rushed toward her as the pilot shut down the engine. Emergency services were called and Amanda was quickly transported to a nearby hospital, but her injuries were catastrophic. She died shortly afterward. Investigators later stated that the accident occurred because she had unknowingly moved into the aircraft's propeller danger zone, one of the most basic hazards around small aircraft. At full speed, a propeller can be almost invisible, and in this case, the one thing Amanda couldn't see was the thing that killed her. The jet blast death. Some of the most famous plane spotting locations in the world are also some of the most dangerous. One of them is Maho Beach on the Caribbean island of St. Martin. The beach sits directly at the end of the runway of Princess Juliana International Airport. Planes fly extremely low over the sand as they land, sometimes just a few meters above the heads of tourists. Because of this, thousands of visitors gather there every year to watch the aircraft. But another attraction draws people even closer to danger. Behind the beach is a metal fence separating the sand from the runway. When large jets prepare for takeoff, many tourists grab onto the fence to experience the blast of air from the engines. It has become something of a tradition, but the power of jet engines is far greater than most people realize. In July 2017, Galen McEwen, a 57-year-old tourist from New Zealand, joined a group of people standing against the fence while a Boeing 737 prepared for departure. As the engines throttled up for takeoff, the blast of air shot backward with incredible force. Within seconds, people began losing their grip on the fence. The woman was thrown violently backward across the concrete behind the beach. She struck her head hard against the pavement. Emergency services responded quickly and transported her to a nearby hospital. She died shortly afterward from her injuries. Airport authorities had already placed multiple warning signs in the area explaining the dangers of jet blast. But despite the warnings, people continue to gather behind the fence every day to feel the power of departing aircraft. And every year, several visitors are injured, doing exactly the same thing. The stolen plane death. On August 10, 2018, Richard Russell reported for work at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Russell was 29 years old and worked as a ground service agent. His job involved handling baggage and assisting aircraft between flights. Late that evening, something extraordinary happened. Russell climbed aboard a Bombardier Q400 turboprop aircraft that was parked on the ramp. The plane belonged to Horizon Air and was not scheduled for departure. But Russell had spent years working around airplanes. He had watched pilots taxi, start engines, and communicate with the tower countless times. Using that knowledge, he started the aircraft. Air traffic controllers suddenly realized an unauthorized plane was taxiing on the runway. Moments later, the aircraft took off. Russell began flying over Puget Sound, performing wide turns and even attempting aerobatic maneuvers while speaking calmly with air traffic controllers on the radio. Fighter jets were scrambled to intercept him, but Russell continued flying for nearly an hour. During the conversation with controllers, he admitted he had no intention of landing. Eventually, the aircraft descended toward Catron Island, southwest of Seattle. Moments later, it crashed into a wooded area on the island. Richard Russell was the only person on board. He died in the crash. The incident shocked aviation experts worldwide, not because of the crash itself, but because a baggage handler with no formal flight training had managed to start, taxi, and fly a commercial aircraft for nearly an hour. The engine ingestion death. On December 31st, 2022, Courtney Edwards reported for work at Montgomery Regional Airport in Alabama. Edwards was 34 years old, a mother of 3 and a ramp agent working for Piedmont Airlines, a regional carrier operating flights for American Airlines. That afternoon, an Embraer E-170 regional jet had just arrived from Dallas with 63 passengers still on board. Normally, aircraft shut down their engines after arriving at the gate, but in this case, the plane's auxiliary power unit was not working, meaning the crew had to leave the engines running while ground operations continued. Because of this, ramp workers had been given 2 safety briefings before approaching the aircraft. The rule was simple. No one was allowed to walk near the engines until they were completely shut down, and the rotating beacon light on top of the aircraft was turned off, signaling that the engines were no longer operating. Inside the cockpit, the first officer even opened his window to warn ground staff that the engines were still running. Despite these warnings, surveillance footage later showed Courtney walking toward the aircraft and moving directly in front of the left engine. Jet engines generate enormous suction. At full power, the intake can pull in objects, equipment, and people from several meters away. As Courtney approached the engine, the force of the airflow pulled her off her feet and directly into the turbine. Passengers inside the aircraft felt a violent vibration as the engine automatically shut down with a loud bang. Emergency services rushed to the aircraft within minutes, but Courtney Edwards had been killed instantly. The accident led to a federal workplace safety investigation and renewed scrutiny of ground safety procedures around aircraft engines. The ground crew engine death. On December 16, 2015, preparations were underway for Air India Flight 619 at Mumbai Airport. The aircraft, an Airbus A319, was scheduled to fly from Mumbai to Hyderabad. The flight had already been delayed because the incoming aircraft had arrived late, and the crew were working quickly to prepare the plane for departure. On the ground, Ravi Subramanian, a 54-year-old ground service engineer, was supervising the pushback procedure near the nose of the aircraft. Subramanian had worked for Air India for more than 20 years and was responsible for coordinating the ground crew while the aircraft was pushed away from the gate. During pushback procedures, communication between the cockpit and the ground team is critical. The aircraft should only begin moving once ground personnel are clear and give the proper signal. But something went wrong. As the aircraft was being pushed back, the pilots began starting the engines. Shortly afterward, the parking brake was released and the plane began to taxi forward. However, several ground workers, including Subramanian, were still standing near the front of the aircraft. Subramanian was facing away from the plane and wearing headphones used for ground communication. When the aircraft began moving, the workers nearby realized the danger and ran away. Subramanian didn't react in time. As the plane rolled forward, he moved into the path of the right engine, which was already running. The powerful suction pulled him into the engine instantly. Other ground workers could only watch as the accident happened in seconds. Subramanian was killed immediately. Investigators later concluded that standard operating procedures had not been properly followed, and both pilots were suspended during the investigation. The Falling Stowaway. On February 22, 1970, a 14-year-old boy named Keith Sapsford arrived at Sydney Airport with one goal. He wanted to see the world. Keith had always been restless. According to his parents, he had an intense desire to travel and explore other countries. They had even sent him to a Catholic institution called Boys Town, hoping discipline would help control his urge to run away, but it didn't work. Only weeks later, Keith escaped and made his way to Sydney Airport. Security at airports in the late 1960s was far less strict than it is today. Keith managed to reach the tarmac and spotted a Japan Airlines Douglas DC-8 preparing for departure to Tokyo. He climbed inside the landing gear compartment, hoping to hide there during the flight. For several hours, he remained hidden while the aircraft prepared for departure. At the same time, just outside the airport perimeter, an amateur photographer named John Gilpin was testing a new telephoto lens. He had positioned himself to photograph aircraft taking off from the runway. When the DC-8 began its takeoff roll, Gilpin pointed his camera at the aircraft and started taking pictures. As the plane lifted into the air, the landing gear began retracting into the fuselage. When the compartment doors opened, Keith lost his grip. He fell from the aircraft from a height of roughly 200 feet. Gilpin captured a photograph at the exact moment Keith fell, showing the silhouette of a boy dropping feet first from the aircraft against the sky. The photographer didn't realize what he had captured until a week later when he developed the film. Investigators later examined the aircraft and found handprints, footprints, and threads from Keith's clothing inside the wheel well. The photograph remains one of the most haunting images ever associated with aviation. The Man Who Fell from the Sky. On June 30th, 2019, a Kenya Airways Boeing 787 departed Nairobi on a long flight to London Heathrow. Unbeknownst to the crew or passengers, at least 2 men had secretly climbed into the aircraft's landing gear compartment before departure. Stowaways sometimes attempt this dangerous method of travel to escape poverty or reach another country without documents. But the conditions inside a wheel well are almost impossible to survive. At cruising altitude, aircraft fly around 40,000 feet above the Earth. At that height, temperatures can drop to minus 60 degrees Celsius, and the air contains almost no oxygen. The space inside the landing gear compartment is unpressurized, meaning the human body is exposed directly to those conditions. Most stowaways lose consciousness within minutes. During the flight to London, one of the men died inside the wheel well. As the aircraft began its descent toward Heathrow Airport, the landing gear was deployed. When the compartment doors opened at about 3,500 feet, the frozen body fell out of the aircraft. Below, in the Clapham neighborhood of South London, a man was relaxing in the garden of a house when he suddenly heard a loud thud. The body had fallen from the sky and landed in the garden just a few feet away from him. Neighbors rushed outside after hearing the impact. At first, they thought someone had collapsed in the yard, but when they looked closer, they realized the man had fallen from an aircraft. Police quickly connected the body to the Kenya Airways flight that had just passed overhead. When the aircraft landed at Heathrow, officers searched the landing gear compartment. Inside, they discovered another man, still alive but unconscious. He was suffering from severe hypothermia and lack of oxygen, but had somehow survived the 9-hour flight. The identity of the man who fell from the sky was never publicly confirmed. The passenger pulled out of the window. On April 17, 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 departed LaGuardia Airport in New York, heading toward Dallas, Texas. On board the Boeing 737 was Jennifer Reardon, a 43-year-old bank executive and mother of 2 from Albuquerque, New Mexico. About 20 minutes into the flight, while cruising at 32,000 feet, something inside the aircraft's left engine suddenly failed. One of the engine's fan blades fractured due to metal fatigue. The broken blade shattered the engine casing, sending debris flying into the fuselage of the aircraft. One piece of shrapnel struck the plane near row 14, where Jennifer Reardon was seated in a window seat. The impact destroyed the window instantly. A violent decompression followed. The powerful rush of air inside the cabin pulled Jennifer toward the opening. Despite wearing her seatbelt, her upper body was sucked partially outside the aircraft. Passengers nearby immediately unbuckled and rushed to help. Several of them grabbed her legs and waist while the aircraft continued flying at high speed through freezing air and intense wind pressure. After a desperate struggle, they managed to pull her back inside the cabin. Passengers with medical training began performing CPR while the pilots initiated an emergency descent. The aircraft diverted to Philadelphia, where the captain successfully landed the damaged plane just 13 minutes after the engine failure. Paramedics boarded immediately and continued resuscitation efforts, but Jennifer Reardon's injuries were too severe. She was pronounced dead shortly afterward at a hospital. Her death marked the first passenger fatality on a U.S. airline in 9 years, and the investigation that followed led to mandatory inspections of similar engine fan blades across the aviation industry. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and help boost the video, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you soon. Bye.